Wow, a lot to talk about. David, you wrote about the debate in your piece, and I think it's a great place to start, especially given the vice presidential debate that we all watched. It's entitled, "This is Why MAGA Loves J.D. Vance." And you wrote in part, quote, "We've seen all of this before. In 2016 and 2020, Mike Pence was the gentleman debater. He was less polished and less effective than Vance, but he had a similar softening effect on the ticket. In 2016, his earnest faith and apparent kindness might have reassured voters that Trump couldn't be that bad. Not if he had chosen Pence. We know exactly how that turned out. In choosing Vance and discarding Pence, Trump traded actual decency for a man who can simulate decency, and that's exactly what Vance did on Tuesday night. But he couldn't keep it together for the entire evening. At the very end, the mask slipped. On Tuesday night, voters learned exactly why MAGA loves Vance so much. He's a talented communicator. He has a compelling life story. He can make the ideological and policy case for Republican populism better than any other politician in America. And he's no Mike Pence. He would wreck the Republic for Donald Trump." So, tell us more, if you can, David, in your piece about the dangers of a Trump-Vance presidency.
Yeah, a lot of people were really surprised by the debate, that it was civil, it was kind, they treated each other well. It felt like a kind of a breath of fresh air for a minute. And then you got down to the very end. At the very end, Vance is challenged about the election. And then we know where he draws the line, where he won't compromise. He's not going to say that the election was fair in 2020. He cast more aspersions on the 2020 outcome. And when he did that, he was broadcasting to MAGA America, don't be fooled by all of this civility. Don't be fooled by all of this decency. When it comes right down to it, if it comes push comes to shove, and we need to overturn or try to overturn an American election again, I'll be there with you this time, not like that guy, Mike Pence. And so at the very end, the whole facade came off. At the very end, everything was plain. All of that civility and decency would slide away in an instant if Donald Trump demanded it.
Yeah, and all that civility nowhere to be found yesterday. Vance went on the attack again, pretty nasty attacks against Walz during a campaign stop in the Midwest. Some observers suggested that Vance won the first 88 minutes of the debate because of how civil and how polished he was, but then lost it those last two with that huge January 6th moment, a moment the Harris team clipped for an ad, and then was underscored yesterday, Charles, because this new filing from Jack Smith. Coincidental timing, of course, but suddenly January 6th back in the headlines. There weren't a lot of new revelations per se, but a lot of really granular and hard-hitting detail. Give us some of your takeaways as you read through Jack Smith's filing.
Well, what the Supreme Court did, John, when they issued their immunity decision is that they raised the bar for prosecuting a former president. They raised the standard, if you will, by creating these three different categories of official acts and unofficial acts for which someone can be prosecuted. And what Jack Smith did in response was go through with a fine-tooth comb and identify point by point the different ways in which you cannot make out a plausible argument that Donald Trump was somehow acting officially. One of the things that I thought that was brilliant about what they did in their brief was they talked a lot about what Donald Trump knew and when he knew it. And establishing that piece of intent is a critical element to show this was not something that was being done in the official capacity of you as the executive of the United States of America. This was something you were doing as a private candidate who knew you had lost an election. Wow.
So, Rev, Trump and Vance keep saying they want to focus on the future. So let's take a look into the window, into the future. In an interview with News Nation last night, former President Trump said if he wins in November, he would revoke the temporary protective status granted to Haitian migrants, legal migrants, in Springfield, Ohio.
In Springfield, what's happening there is horrible. You have a beautiful community, 52,000 people, and about 30,000 people were put into that community rapidly, and the community is so nice, and they want to be so politically correct. You have to remove the people. we cannot destroy our country. You had a beautiful, safe community. Everyone's in love with everybody. Everything was nice. It was like a picture community. And all of a sudden, in a short period of time, they have 32,000 more people in there. They are, in my opinion, it's not legal. It's not legal for anybody to do. It's not even on a human basis. It's not acceptable to the people that are there, and certainly to the people that are in Springfield. Springfield is such a beautiful place. Have you seen what's happened to it? It's been overrun. You can't do that to people. They have to be removed.
So we've seen what's happened to it, Reverend Al. Kids have to get escorted to school by police. There are bomb threats. There are people who are afraid to go to work. There are Haitians who are afraid to go to work. Yes, we've seen what's happened to Springfield. But deporting and kicking out legal migrants, is it a new low, or how would you describe this? What's your reaction?
It's definitely something that should be extremely troubling to everyone, that you have a man saying that if I'm president again, I'm going to arbitrarily just deport people. There's no complaints about them. The people in Springfield has defended them. The governor, who's Republican, has said this is bogus, what you're saying, and he says, I'm going to deport them anyway. Well, that's a threat to any of us in this country, that he can just decide with no process of law. I mean, I'm not the lawyer here. Brooklyn has given us Charles Coleman, one of our brilliant lawyers, but I can tell you there needs to at least be some due process to deport people. He just says 30,000 people, I'm sending them away. To have that kind of person with that mentality as president is frightening to many of us that believe in some due process and having a procedure of law.
Yeah, and Joanna, it's important to get the numbers right, which Donald Trump is not getting in this case. Springfield is a population of about 60,000, but I haven't seen anywhere that there are 30,000 migrants who have moved in. The most seems to be about 15,000 is the number that people are settling on there. And again, the numbers matter because that is affecting the impact of what he's saying.
But it's also interesting to try and understand if there is any logic whatsoever to be applied to Donald Trump's ramblings, is how this actually plays as a strategy. And I think on top of the January 6th report, this is where the Bush Republicans start to think, OK, this is really too much. And sort of if you think about what's happening today, Liz Cheney is actually in Wisconsin with Kamala Harris. The two of them are campaigning together. This feels like for independents or Bush Republicans, this is too much now. And that could be enough in the swing states to ensure Kamala wins.
So it's so interesting, Jonathan Lemire, because this is not the first time we've heard Donald Trump talking like a dictator wannabe. And beyond saying he would be a dictator for a day, he also recently said on stage when he was asked about pardoning the January 6th convicts, people who were convicted of crimes they committed on January 6th, violent crimes. He said he would pardon them all. And the reporter followed up saying, well, who would decide? Like, if they really should be convicted, if they really committed crimes, or if they should be pardoned, and I mean, just let them all go. And he goes, well, I would decide. It's all him. It's all the way he wants this country to look when he gets into office. And it's just so interesting to hear independent voters, going, I need to know more about Kamala Harris, when you know this about Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump took steps during his first term in office to consolidate power in the executive branch. And since leaving office, he's been bolstered by the Supreme Court in a series of decisions, including the one on immunity. Also, Project 2025, other right-wing think tanks, Republican operations, are also doing that, trying to put more and more power in the Oval Office. So Trump would have this incredible leeway were he to be elected again. First, and that includes, as he is saying, deporting immigrants who are here legally. Those migrants in Springfield, mind you, who the town manager, who other residents say have been a boon. They've needed the help. They've helped revive that town. The governor of Ohio has gone to bat a number of times, defying Trump, saying how necessary they are. And yes, this is Donald Trump talking about January 6th, appearing in front of a convict choir and saying he would pardon by his own decision those involved. So, David French, There's all these forces come together here as the backdrop. You know, as just noted, Liz Cheney is appearing with Kamala Harris in Wisconsin today. In fact, the town where the modern Republican Party was born. Do you think this permission structure they're trying to set up, combined with the events that we've just been discussing, is that going to lure some Republicans to not just stay home and not vote for Donald Trump, but to actually cast their ballot for Vice President Harris?
Some, with an emphasis on not very many, but not very many could be decisive. I mean, we have seen in previous elections that when Trump starts to hit that ceiling of his support in that 46%, 47% range, that even a few thousand people in the suburbs who leave that top ballot blank or switch parties and vote can swing the whole thing. We saw that in 2020 in Georgia and Wisconsin. Some of these Republican suburban voters may have ended up swinging the whole thing. So it doesn't take many. When the election is this close, what makes a difference? Almost everything makes a difference. So if you're peeling off some Republicans here and there, especially those Bush-Cheney Republicans, it's gonna matter. It's gonna matter. But it also does another thing. By reaching out to Liz Cheney in a very explicit way, it also moderates Kamala Harris. And so I think that drains some of the energy from the attack on her that she's some sort of far left extremist. And so there's a moderating effect there, and I think there's a persuasive effect on a few thousand voters in various places that could actually make the difference in the election.